India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi defends his decision to strip Indian-administered Kashmir of its special status as India celebrates its independence. The region's been on lockdown for about 10 days. Britain's opposition leader writes to MPs in a bid to oust Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Jeremy Corbyn proposing a caretaker government to avoid a no-deal Brexit. And France marks 75 years since Operation Dragoon, which paved the way for the Allied invasion of southern France. Most of the French forces were made up of African soldiers. Hello and welcome back to the newsroom. I'm Claire Pride. Now we start with some news just in. A Gibraltar court has decided to drop legal proceedings against the crew of an Iranian tanker at the centre of a standoff between Iran and the UK. But the US has got involved. The Department of Justice is seeking to seize the Grace 1, which was apprehended outside the port of Gibraltar in early July on suspicion that it was taking oil to Syria. Now turning our attention to Narendra Modi's Independence Day speech, India's Prime Minister defended his sudden decision to scrap Indian-administered Kashmir's autonomy, saying it's about boosting the region's economy. There was no mention of Pakistan, a day after Imran Khan used his Independence Day speech to warn against any attack on the Pakistani part of Kashmir. Now, the Indian side has been on lockdown for more than a week now, with mobile and web networks cut off and large gatherings banned. There have, however, been protests against India's move.
The old arrangements during the last 70 years encouraged secessionism. They gave birth to terrorism and nurtured nepotism. And in a way, they made the foundations of corruption and discrimination stronger.
And now I'm joined by France 24's commentator Doug Herbert. Doug, Modi then has been giving a speech saying that great things lie ahead for Indian-administered Kashmir, but most people in that region, it seems, would disagree.
Disagree virulently, very, very strongly. Look, it's true. Modi has been saying, even said last week, he said that the old system as it exists in Kashmir, it's created a secessionism, terrorism, nepotism, widespread corruption. He couldn't say enough ill about it. And this move of revoking the special status, which has been hailed by Modi, his party, their minions, their cohorts, is all about spurring development in the region, ending poverty, bringing Kashmir, integrating it, bringing it fully into India's fold by making it constitutionally, putting it on the same footing with every other region in India. The problem is, look, the reality in Kashmir has been far different and far more complicated and nuanced by virtue of its history since the partition in 1947. And the reality for Kashmiris since then has been one of militarization. It's been one of occupation by Indian troops in Indian-administered Kashmir, and security forces, which from the Kashmiri point of view have often been able to act with impunity. And all of that is now squared or tripled or whatever after the revocation of the special status, in addition to the 500,000 Indian troops or so that were already based and stationed around the province. You've had thousands more come in. They're stationed everywhere. For Kashmiris, it's now like one big open prison, like a mass detention center. And for the stauncher of the critics, including many prominent Kashmiri politicians, civic leaders, many of whom have been arrested in recent days, in the days since the lifting of this special status, because they've spoken out against it. This is basically India hammering a very, very large nail into the coffin of the idea that India is actually the world's biggest democracy and a secular democracy at that. What this is about, they say, is Modi, even if he doesn't cast himself as a Hindu nationalist, it's all about his Hindu agenda. Kashmir is a Muslim majority, the only Muslim majority region in India. And for these Kashmiris, this is all about India essentially colonizing Kashmir, moving in and trying to change its ethnic composition, its religious ethnic composition, trying to change it from a Muslim majority area into a Hindu area. So this is about, in the words of one critic, basically lifting this special status coercively aggressively and violently trying to advance a Hindu supremacist agenda. You know, you talk in the U.S. about Trump and his white supremacist agenda. You could look at India through a similar prism for the Kashmiris. This is about sort of a Hindu nationalist prism and trying to impose that template on Kashmir with its many different issues and its very different ethnic and religious composition.
Thank you very much, Doug. Moving on now to Jeremy Corbyn's efforts to avoid a no-deal Brexit. Britain's opposition leader has asked rival parties for support in a vote of no confidence in the government. He says he would delay Brexit and call a general election. The leader of the Liberal Democrats, however, dismissed the idea that Corbyn could be a caretaker prime minister. If there were a vote, it wouldn't be before early September. Emerald Maxwell reports.
Setting the scene for a showdown. UK opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn has written a letter to MPs urging them to bring down Prime Minister Boris Johnson with a vote of no confidence to stop a no-deal Brexit. The Labour leader says he will then form a strictly time-limited temporary government, which would delay Brexit while it held a general election. Johnson's government said the letter showed Corbyn wanted to overrule the 2016 referendum and considered the British people as servants. It comes after Johnson accused his fellow lawmakers of being collaborators for trying to block Brexit in a Facebook Q&A.
There's a terrible kind of collaboration, as it were, going on between people who think they can block Brexit in Parliament and our European friends.
Johnson has vowed to take Britain out of the European Union by October 31st, with or without a deal. His party, though, is divided. Former Finance Minister Philip Hammond said Parliament would block a no-deal exit and that the government must respect it.
Any idea of trying to bypass Parliament by dissolving it, for example, and holding an election over the exit date would provoke a constitutional crisis. I'm confident that Parliament has a clear view on this and that Parliament has the means to express that view.
As lawmakers draw their battle lines over Brexit, Corbyn could still struggle to secure enough backing for his challenge against Johnson. The Labour leader is a divisive figure in Parliament, even among his own side. MPs will reconvene after their summer break on September 3rd, less than 2 months before the UK is set to leave the EU.
In other news, reinforcements have been sent to firefighters battling a major fire on the Greek island of Evia. It started on Tuesday, forcing the evacuation of several villagers. Italy and Spain sent help. Karis Garland has more.
An ecological disaster as a once pristine mountain wildlife habitat goes up in flames. Greek firefighters continued to battle wildfires from the air and on land Wednesday. Pine forest reduced to ash. Residents surprised at the fire's resilience.
The firefighters thought it was mostly controllable, but it sneaked in right behind their backs and reached the other side of the mountain too.
Since Tuesday, the island of Evia off the eastern side of the central Greek peninsula has been under a state of emergency as fires spread by high temperatures and strong winds have sprung up in hard-to-reach areas. 4 villages have been evacuated, with residents returning to 2 of them Wednesday. Greece is often hit by wildfires during the dry summer months, but climate change is augmenting their frequency and severity, a fact acknowledged by newly elected Conservative Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis as he cut short his holiday to visit the region.
We know that wildfires will be with us. They will be part of our, as they've always been, but they've been more part of our daily life. As climate change is taking its toll on southern Europe, and that is why it is imperative at the European level to strengthen the rescEU mechanism in order to have more coordination at the European level to fight incidents like the one we had in Greece.
Memories are still fresh in the country of a major fire that devastated the seaside town of Mati near Athens in July of last year, claiming 102 lives. Authorities were accused of poor coordination and slow response in the wake of that blaze.
A ceremony is being held in the southern French town of Saint-Raphaël today to mark 75 years since World War II's Operation Dragoon, which paved the way for the Allied invasion of southern France. French President Emmanuel Macron has the heads of Guinea and Ivory Coast by his side today, since most of the French forces on what is sometimes called the Second D-Day were made up of African soldiers from what are now France's former colonies. The campaign also involved British and US troops. Joining me now, military expert Dominique Trinquant. Hello, thank you very much for coming in. So is it fair to say that today is all about recognising the role of and paying tribute to these African soldiers?
Yes, it's really the African army which has been fighting already in Africa, of course, Libya mainly, and in Italy, which landed in south of France. And that's very important because a lot of this country at that time, mainly North Africa, Tunisia, Morocco and Algeria, had been fighting. In Algeria it was French territory, so they were conscripts, but in Morocco and Tunisia they were volunteers. And in the rest of Africa too, tirailleurs sénégalais, for example, were volunteers to fight and didn't know France. When they landed, it was the first time they saw France, and even they were ready to give their life for their country they didn't know.
Has their role been recognised before? I mean, is this ceremony bigger than before?
Yes, it's bigger than before. Why? Because mainly D-Day was 2 months earlier. It's a big ceremony with the US mainly really involved, and the British, of course, really involved. And 15th of August, it's the middle of August in France. It's a bank holiday, as you say, which is a religious ceremony in France, because Mary was for the King Louis XIII. France was devoted to Virgin Mary. That's why it's a bank holiday in France. So it's a big in the middle of the summer. So it's very difficult to have people gathering. But I think 75 years after that, there are very few survivors of that time. They are roughly between 90 and 95 years old. And so it's fair to say that we want to give this to the young generation. It was very interesting to see that all the flags from this African country, which at that time didn't exist, the ceremony with the two African presidents were only with the French flag, because in 1944 there was only the French flag. Now there are all these African flags were taken by young people, and it's very important for them, for us to see that these young people, some of them, their grandfather were coming from Africa and fight for France. It's important for them to remember that.
Absolutely. Now, this operation happened 2 months after the Normandy landings, and like I was saying, this is sometimes referred to as the second D-Day. Why was there a 2-month delay? Was that the plan?
The plan was that there was a need for a second landing. The British, Mr. Churchill mainly wanted to go to the Balkans, either from Italy or directly from the Balkans. The Americans didn't want to go to the Balkans. They needed a harbor like Marseille and Toulon. And the French push very hard to have the landing in France, because at that time, then you had the landing in Normandy, the landing in the south of France. Hitler gave the order to all the German forces to withdraw from the southwest of France, so there was no fighting in the southwest of France because of these two operations. And they joined in September, which is quite early, in September in Burgundy, and afterwards were able to fight in Alsace, Vosges, and all this part of French border. So it was very important to have a second. Remember that the Germans were fighting in Normandy, in Italy, and in Poland at that time.
So were there not many Germans actually in the...
There were very few German there. And so this landing, with the fact also that during the fact that the first French army was going through Lyon and in the north, in Burgundy, then lots of the resistance, what we call les FFI, French forces from the interior, will join this first French army. We mean that this resistance, which were some communists, some coming from everywhere, will be part of an army, a French army. So it was important that the French forces will fight with the African forces in France, but also that the resistance will be put in uniform and inside an army. And that's why General de Latte, who was at the head of the first French army, was present on the 8th of May for the signature with the German, because French was really part of the victory.
All right, well, thank you very much indeed for your time and your analysis,
Thank you.
Dominique Trinquant. We'll leave it there for now. Thank you for watching. Do stay tuned.